Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bridging Careers and our storytelling session. So we'll be focusing today on telling your career story in a compelling way. This is the third of 10 free events this week with over 40 amazing speakers. So before we get started, I'd like to begin by paying respect to the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So I'm Yvonne Kelly, the founder of Glow Up Careers. We're a tech-enabled, growing global career coaching community and a social enterprise. So that's why we're bringing you Bridging Careers in partnership with Cisco. And we've got some of the lovely Cisco team on here today supporting us. So we've got Johanna and Kira. So we'll be live on YouTube. So thanks for joining us. And all this week is going to be free. So we have 10 a.m., which this session, and 2 p.m. So all of our speakers have volunteered their time, and we're so grateful for them for sharing all their knowledge, obviously, in this current environment. This session will run for 60 minutes. So if you'd like to share or comment on social media, we'll be using the hashtag BridgingCareers. So it's hashtag BridgingCareers, all one word. Our Instagram and Twitter handle is @GlowUpCareers. We're live tweeting the session, so make sure that you share, and we'd love to hear from you about what you think and if you've got any questions. You'll see on your YouTube on the right hand side there's a little chat box, so please feel free. We've got a team of our coaches, so we've got Brigitte, and we've also got Trish and Alex from Glow Up Careers who are on there live, ready to answer your questions. So we'll hopefully answer them as best as we can. So let's get straight into this session. So we're going to hear from our panel pretty much everything you need to tell a great story, obviously about you and your career. Yesterday morning we had a wonderful session on preparing for the job market. So we covered off resume, cover letter. We also talked about keywords. And a lot of the conversation from those panel members kept on coming up to telling your story, how you zone into your strengths and really put your best foot forward to find a job. We all know the job market is pretty tough at the moment, so you want to be able to stand out. So that's what our panel members are going to really help you with today. You can see the recording on our YouTube Glow Up Careers account of yesterday's session, and all of our sessions will really kind of overlap and join together. So I'd like to introduce you to our amazing moderator for this panel session, Emma Hannigan. So Emma Hannigan is a journalist. She's a professional speaker on storytelling, and she's the founder of Curly Top Media. She presents and writes for ABC Television and Radio, where she works as a journalist and is a contributor to various magazines, writing on storytelling for business and leadership. She's Irish, like me, and loves to dance the tango. So welcome, Emma.
Thank you, Yvonne, and welcome to Byron Bay, where I'm based, which is Bundjalung country, and an acknowledgement to the custodians of the Bundjalung land and the beautiful northern rivers. I'm delighted to be joined today by the lovely Nina Mapstone-Bone. Nina is the Managing Director of Beaumont People, and they specialise. It's a recruitment business that believes in placing people first. She's the President of the RCSA and Chair of the Development Committee for the North Foundation. That's a charity that supports innovation in health, research and patient care. And when Nina is not busy with all of the rest of her life, she loves to play hockey. Our next panellist is Beck Brown. Beck's an author and founder of the Comms Department, which is a public relation and crisis management agency. She works with her team with some of Australia's biggest and best known media, entertainment, travel and lifestyle brands. Now, Beck has recently launched a book, you've got this, The Essential Career Handbook for Creative Women, which is very timely and which I will have to get a copy of. Beck lives in Sydney. And aside from her busy life as a PR professional, she's also a baker. And if you would like to check out Beck's creations, you can look on Instagram at Beck Brown Brownie. And Beck says that this is her secret weapon when it comes to clients. James Hayes is our last panelist, and James is a leadership and team effectiveness specialist. He's an internal coach at Canva and has over 7 years of working with some of the largest companies in Australia and around the world, like Salesforce, Fiji Airways, John Deere, Millward Brown Vermeer, and the Australian Department of Defence. He's passionate about helping people, leaders, and teams set crazy big goals and overcome the internal obstacles required to achieve them. And for me personally, I think the internal blocks and obstacles are the hardest to overcome. And James is about to have his first baby in 6 weeks. So welcome to you all. So first of all, for me, really, being a journalist my whole career, I got to a point where I felt like I didn't know where to go next. So I spoke to a friend of mine who's a HR professional, and I said to her, I think I'm going to go back to university and study law. And she was like, no, don't be crazy. So she sat me down and she said, okay, tell me what you can do. So I said, well, I can write, I can present, I can interview, and she's like, okay, so what do you love about your job? And for me, the thing that I love about my job has always been people, meeting people and their stories. Like, if I was the boy from The Sixth Sense, I wouldn't see dead people, I would see stories. I just see stories everywhere. And she said, okay, that's your business. You're going to open a business. It's going to be storytelling for business, and you're going to help people tell their story. You're going to help businesses and corporates to tell their story. And I laughed because this was about 5 years ago. And I was like, that's not a business. That's not a thing. But then I soon discovered it is a thing. So, one of the things about this is the realization that all your skills can be transferable. But it's how we package those skills into a story that helps to convince employers. So this is a question for all panelists. I'll start with you, Beck. How do we weave storytelling into our job search?
Can I just say, to start off, Emma, that was fantastic. I love that you said that. And I'm with you. I'm an avid story lover. And what is really interesting that underpins everything is knowing that at the end of the day, people are more interesting than products. People are more interesting than brands. And so telling your story is what makes you interesting. And then you tell your story in order to stand out. But in order to stand out, you need to know first what you stand for. And so that's when it comes back to knowing what your values are. Again, what you're talking about with your skills, and if they're transferable, knowing what those skills are and how you can weave that into your narrative and what you say to people as well.
And James, what would you say to how important it is, or how would you help people to go about telling their story in a job search? And also, for so many people who've been made redundant and looking for work, how do you reframe that story into something positive?
Right, that's a great question. It's something I've experienced myself twice before. Suddenly I'm out of work, and then it's a scary reality. And anyone who's kind of in that space right now, my heart goes out to you. It's an uncomfortable experience, but it always reminds me of this famous quote, and it goes a little bit something like, adversity reveals genius and prosperity conceals it. And I've experienced that to be true in my life. And growing up, I lived in a single house with my mother, who was raising me, and I get a little bit emotional remembering this, but it was a struggle street. She didn't have very much money. There was one time when the house ran out of power, and she just pulled it together. She just got creative. She just became more determined. She just figured it out. She did side jobs. She just pulled it together. And over the years, she rose to the very heights of success in her career. And it was those difficult times, it was those moments of struggle that really forced her to be so much more than she was when she began. And remembering that always gives me courage whenever I'm faced with a difficulty or whenever I'm faced with a challenge. And it's a great reminder. It's these times that call forth the most in us. Whereas when times are easy, it's a lot easier to just coast and not reinvent ourselves and not create a bigger and better story.
And James, can you tell me a little bit about, I mean, I really relate to that story about your mum. I had this realization recently about my mum. We grew up dirt poor, and I was thinking about it recently, and my mum just had the focus on stories and imagination and books, and she gave us a very rich life. She gave us a rich inner life because she couldn't give us a rich material life. And I think about that, and I think about the impact that had on me and my career. I became that, I do what I do. And James, for you, do you, when those times you say you were in that situation twice, how did you reframe it? How did you move on from it?
Right. So both times that happened, the story that I told myself was, this is the universe, like testing me, challenging me, giving me something to rise above. So how am I going to do that? And so each and every time it happened, I just sat down, put together a plan. What's my vision? What is it I ultimately care about? Where do I want to go in my life? And what is the next thing I can do to make one step closer in that direction? I'm very fortunate that each time that has happened, it's always resulted in a significantly better position, a significantly better place.
It always does.
Right. And I've always come out the other end way more confident. And I think that's true for lots of people. Adversity doesn't feel very good when you're going through it, but coming out the other end, you're a lot more confident, creative, intelligent, determined. And so I think
fantastic.
It's a good thing.
And Nina, you're on the other side of this. So you're seeing job seekers coming to you and you're dealing with people. How important is it for you as a recruiter that people have a good, can have a positive take on, what they've been through, or, what's the story? How important are stories when people are coming to you looking for roles?
It's crucial because you can see, Emma, you can see with the conversation you and James have just had that great stories help build connections. They help build emotional connections. And anytime you're looking for a role, obviously there's the technical piece. I mean, that goes without saying. But the thing that's really going to get you over the line is the emotional connection that you create with the other person. And that's where storytelling is powerful. And if I come back to Beck's original point about you obviously need to work out what you stand for, and that forms the basis of your story in terms of your strengths and what your capabilities are. But you also then need to think about your audience and who's listening, because any great story really thinks about tailoring that story for the audience. And that's where within a job application and an interview process, you've really got to have both sides of those to make that emotional connection to help make you stand out from other candidates.
And I guess, Nina, the issue can be as well that how do you tell that story in a cover letter and a resume, like before you even get to meet the person? What are the things that you would see in resumes or cover letters that would, that make it stand out, that in terms of story that you go, I'd like to know more about that?
It's a great question. So the key thing is not just to list things. You do need to make your resume succinct, your application succinct. It needs to be easy to read, easy on the eye. But let's just say a job requires great Excel skills. If you just say Excel skills, there's no story in that. There's no engagement in that. If you say, by way of example, Excel skills, worked on a project that required, and list some specific details and what the achievements of the project were, you're telling the story of how your Excel skills were used within the concept of that work. So you have to limit it in an application. Yes, you can put a bit more into a cover letter. If you've got selection criteria that you can address, you can put a bit more even in there, but just enough to hook the recruiter or the hiring manager to want to contact you and find out more. So it's like a really great introduction. When you read a novel and you read the first couple of sentences and you want to read the rest, that's what your resume needs to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think part of it is about trying your best to inject personality into that, because ultimately, if the person reading your resume doesn't like the personality that you have come across as, then you probably don't want to work there anyway.
Or if you don't stand out, Emma, because the unfortunate thing right now is that there are a number of people looking for work. We know that. We know it's a tough time, and so it might not be that they don't like your application. It might be just that it gets lost in the sameness of all the other applications. And sometimes people make the mistake of trying to stand out by being maybe a bit too wacky, a bit too colourful in the formatting, or a bit too kind of out there. And depending on the environment, that can actually work quite well. James might say, I don't know, it might work well at Canva, for example, but that's the piece about tailoring it to your audience. So you've got to think about how you make yourself stand out and how it's tailored to the audience that you're targeting.
Now, the next thing is, the question is, of course, for everybody is, how do I go about creating a story? So for me, and I think for anyone who hasn't watched Simon Sinek's TED Talk on, why, go and watch it, because that's the key for everything with me. I mean, I think you have to start with the why. Why do you do what you do? What do you love about it? How did you get started in this career? Were there people along the way who were influential or positive in that journey? Oh, excuse me, a door has just blown shut. Write those questions down and think about that and think, okay, how did I get here? So you can do that process yourself. And this is something that I teach clients, is how to tell your own story. So I'm going to ask James to answer the same question. How do people go about finding their story?
Right. Thank you, Emma. I loved some of the examples that you gave about really digging into why you love what you do. And I also am an advocate of that. I think looking at your skills is really important, but that's kind of step two. Step one is really, what is it you love? What is it you're passionate about? As you look through the events of your life, what is the theme? If your life has been trying to answer a question, and I think probably for each of you it has, what has been that question? As I looked back at my life, I realized from a very early age, like from a teenager, when I was first doing martial arts, I was always trying to figure out, how can I get more out of myself? How can I change the way that I think so I can perform better? So for years and years before I even looked into the profession that I'm in now, it was a question that I was asking and trying to answer. If you can find the thing that you care about, the thing that you love, then you always have an advantage, because every obstacle becomes an exciting challenge or an interesting problem to solve. If you don't really know what you love, and if you're not doing what you love, then every obstacle is more like a chore or a grind. So I think start with answering that question and then look at your skills. If you know what you love, it helps position the kind of category that you want to work in. Maybe you want to work with people, maybe you want to work with psychology. When you look at your skills, what am I good at? What are my strengths? What are my aptitudes? That can help define the flavor of category. So for example, with me, I've always loved working with people and working with psychology. I also enjoy speaking. So if you enjoy speaking, then being some form of speaker or facilitator might be more of your thing. Whereas if you're more interested in a different type of skill, then there's heaps of other professions inside that category that might be better suited to you. But yeah, when passion meets strengths, I think you've got something really amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that, I have realized also about myself, is that purpose is very important to me in a job. Does it have purpose? Am I helping other people? Now, Nina, Beck, you've just finished writing a book. So Beck, tell us and tell everyone, how do people create a story? What are your tips around that?
It's funny. I think I'm going to be echoing everything Nina just said and everything James just said and probably everything you've said. I feel like we're very aligned. Knowing who you are, what you stand for, knowing what your why is really important. The next step to that is also then knowing who your audience is and what you're trying to convey to them, which also comes back to purpose. So in my job as a PR professional, I need to know my clients very well. But more importantly than that, I need to know my clients' audiences very well. So whether they're customers or their audiences as well. So I took the same approach when I wrote the book, when I wrote You've Got This. The reason I wrote You've Got This was because two reasons. One, I was starting to get a lot of graduates and young professionals coming to me for career advice, or from people who wanted to start their own business, or a lot of people who kind of didn't quite understand how PR worked but knew it could help them professionally. So it was time to start compiling some of that knowledge. But the second reason was I had a really rough time personally navigating my own career in my 20s. And I really wish that somebody had given me a handbook to help me navigate some of those times. When I was 25, I had what I call my quarter life crisis. And I realized that the career that I was in at the time, that I'd trained for ever since I was a little girl, was just not making me happy at all. So I completely gave it away. I'd studied at the Conservatorium of Music and was an opera singer. And I wanted to be that since I was a little girl. And at 25, I just realized it wasn't making me happy, wasn't making me fulfilled. So I had to go back and go, okay, what do I actually love? What do I enjoy doing? What do I like to, what gives me joy? How can I help other people? And in doing that, I realized that PR or media or telling stories was something that I really liked to do. Now I come back at it and I look, I'm an employer and I'm currently going through the process of recruiting at the moment too. And definitely to Nina's point, the idea around personalization is everything. So when you're telling your story, you want to be you want to be your authentic you, and talking about the important points of what you can do and what you can deliver, what your skills and competencies are. But you also really want to then flip it and put yourself in your audience's shoes. So let's say your prospective employer, to say, well, what did they want and what did they need? So
yeah. It's really important, I guess, to look at those things. What are the what are the selection criteria? What are they asking you for? And answer those questions, or weave your story into those questions.
Yeah, definitely. You need to be a bit of a chameleon. You really do have to, again, be empathy, draw on all the empathy that you have to say, what do they want? And I know it sounds silly, but the amount of perhaps applications that I would receive that simply didn't answer the criteria or didn't answer the job description or didn't follow that process. And, that is a bit of a test. That's the first test to get through. So
yeah, exactly.
Making sure that you answer the job ad in the way that it's actually asking you to is the first thing to do. But then weave your story into it. But it's one thing to weave your story into it to say, this is what I stand for and this is what's exciting. But the next step is the crucial one. And and how is that going to be of benefit to you, my new employer? Yeah. So I think that's probably just knowing what that step is.
And Nina can probably tell us a bit more about that. So Nina, how do we create this story within our job applications?
It's a great question, and I'm going to expand on that by coming back to a point that both Beck and James made, if that's okay, because I think it's quite an important one, which is this idea. We've been touching on this idea about finding what you love, finding what your passion is, and I just think it's worth calling out, as we speak to often younger job seekers, but can happen across all generations, where there's this kind of feel, this Instagram feel of, the hashtag find a job you love and you'll never work another day in your life. And the challenge with that is that makes a lot of people feel like failures. That makes them feel like, because they don't know what their passion is or they don't know what they're doing, they feel like they're a failure and therefore they're no good at anything. So I think what you need to do is, yes, you need to find out what you love, but don't get put off by this kind of concept of it has to be so amazing that you're always going to love every second of it. I love my husband. There are seconds when I don't love him. There are even the things we love sometimes aren't perfect all of the time. So I think the crucial thing is to find out what energizes you. Find out what is not hard, it's not draining for you to do. And, I know I'm going to touch on strengths and those kind of things. That's what will drive that. And once you've got that, then you can bring that into your job application. So it's a long-winded way of answering your question, Emma, but to say that the application, you want to highlight your strengths. They need to be aligned, as Beck was saying, to the target of what you're going for. And so you should really only be applying for things that are suited to your strengths. Don't make the mistake. It's too easy now. Hit apply, hit apply, hit apply, hit apply. Don't bombard. Be selective, but really make sure it's aligned to your strengths, and then really tell the story of your strengths and how they align to what the employer is looking for through the application process.
Thanks, Nina. So we've had a question come through from a viewer about rehearsing your story when you're going to tell it in person rather than writing it in a cover letter. So really the main thing with this is that, you write your story, write a first draft. So I always say to people, set a 25-minute timer. And because the problem with so many people is that people think, I can't write. I'm not a writer. My English teacher told me I was rubbish. My spelling and grammar is terrible. You're not being a writer. You're telling your own story. And just remember that. You. So sit down for 25 minutes. Write down your story. all of the things that we've talked about, why you do, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what you're good at, what obstacles you faced along the way, what are all the transferable skills you have. And that's just a first draft. And, Brene Brown talks about the shitty first draft, but, write a shitty first draft and you can refine it. Now, rehearsing it is one of those things that I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to throw to Yvonne Kelly, who is our moderator. Yvonne and I had a session last week because Yvonne was preparing to do media interviews. So what we did is we sat down and we talked and I asked her lots of questions. And in the course of that, her story came out. So we talked about that and I had said, I really like this section of your story. I think that really relates to people. So Yvonne has already been through a recession in Ireland and really struggled, and her Irish husband struggled, her Australian husband struggled. So for me, I think that when I'm telling a story, when I'm speaking, when I'm doing my events, yes, you should practice your story, write it out, just say it and know it. If you know it in your own mind, you know the story. It doesn't need to be word for word and it shouldn't be learned off a page. But as long as you know it in here. Yvonne, how did you go with, so the points that we covered last week when we were practicing for the media interview, how did you prepare for those interviews? How did you prepare to tell your story orally?
Yeah, so I think just practicing with you, Emma, really helped. Just talking through, and then when I talked about the struggles that we had in Ireland and the really hard time that we had, myself and Alex, trying to find work in those times, and we had to pay rent 12 months in advance, and I'd had my own business, and people over there were saying, oh, they're not relevant in this market, and you've been out of Ireland too long, and Alex is Australian, and it started making us think about, wow, people from overseas coming to Australia who don't have a language, and that's much, and they're from a different culture, it's much harder. So yeah, I think just talking to you, Emma, and bringing out the crux of that's really the passion of why I've set up Glow Up and this business, and been able to share that story with other people. And it was interesting, yesterday we had Deborah Woolard, the VP of People and Communities from Cisco, speaking, and she said that in an interview she had all these people apply for a job, and one girl started talking about the process that she went to buy a car, and a little bit, James, like your mum's story, just how much she had to save, and all the different jobs that she had to do, and that she paid for this car in cash, and that was the reason that she got the job. So that was a story that Deborah told yesterday, and I think being able to relate or start with a story, and Nina, I think you're totally right about connecting with the person that you're speaking to and trying to find out as much as you can about them and how you can actually make that real, true connection.
And Yvonne, did you find that you needed to rehearse the story once you'd sort of got it clear in your mind, or once it was clear in your mind, were you happy to talk off the cuff about it?
No, I have to rehearse it now.
Okay. Oh, good to know. Yeah, just because I want to make sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I did a radio interview this morning, and they asked some of those questions, and it just brought up more kind of emotions and memories, and it even brought out more in that story. And I think when, James, you mentioned when you've been through a hard time, sometimes you just put that aside and you lock it up, and it is emotional. So it is good then when you can tap into that and be comfortable with your story. And I think redundancies are similar. People feel like it's a real negative and they shouldn't talk about it. Whereas if you unpack it and you have someone else that you can talk that through, you get really clear. And the more you tell your story, the better you get at doing that.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, it's one of the things that I often talk about in the storytelling workshops is that, a story that goes in a straight line or in just success, well, it's boring, right? And the biggest objection that I get when I talk about storytelling, people is like, oh, I don't want to be bigging myself up. That's a tall poppy thing. But if you're telling the highs and the lows of your story, then you're not bigging yourself up. And everyone relates to failure much more closely than they relate to success. And, in talking about that, Yvonne, one of my first jobs, I had been asked, I was headhunted by this radio station. I was 22, I think 21 or 22. And they'd asked me to come for an interview. And I went along and I got the job. But it was horrendous. And I was really bullied by the person I was reporting to, and he was awful. So after 6 months of probation, they had said, oh, we've decided not to keep you on. And I was like, yeah, no shit, like this is not working out. This has been a terrible experience. But I went to talk to a man who was the head of news at a newly opened TV station in Ireland called TV3. And when I think about it, my God, I was so ballsy. Traveled to Dublin, got dressed up, did my hair and makeup, walked into a TV station and said, I'd like to speak to the head of news, please. And I have no idea how I got past security or how I got in there, but I did. But I told them what happened. And I said, I'm devastated. I've just lost this job. I don't know what to do. I would love to come and work for free and do work experience for you. And he said, Emma, I've been through exactly the same experience myself. And yes, of course, we'd love to have you come and do work experience. And I ended up working there for 3 years. So be vulnerable. It's okay to talk about the failures. And I think that's important because that's where you'll connect, So in terms of, looking at understanding our strengths and how to talk about those strengths, James, from your perspective, how would you say, what tools would you say are useful to uncovering strengths? And how important is it to use those strengths in sort of, talking about your job or your career or what you hope to achieve?
At Canva, we actually use a pretty cool tool called Fingerprint for Success, and they've got a free version of it too, so totally check that out. I'm not affiliated in any way. And it's a really good tool because what it does is look at people's primary motivations, like what are the things that they value the most in the way that they think, in the way that they communicate, in the way that they decide. So it gives people a really good snapshot. The areas where we really value that type of thinking or that type of communicating are the areas where we tend to pay lots of attention and be really strong. The areas where we don't really value so much, like maybe, for example, I hate the details. I'm more of a big picture thinker. If you give me the fine print or if I have to read a contract, I'll go crazy. Well, areas where I don't value that type of thinking, I tend to not pay attention to them and so end up being weaker in them. So we use this tool to help see what do people value and therefore where do they spend most of their thinking space? And based on that, where are they likely to shine and where are they likely to struggle? So this is pretty useful information in terms of, what I should be positioning myself for job-wise or role-wise. In the absence of a tool like that, I would just look at my skills and which of the ones do I really love using? Like which skills, if someone woke me up in the middle of the night to solve a problem and I had to use this skill, I would be happy to do it. I would enjoy doing it. I think it's critical to really be working with key strengths that you really love. I think there's definitely a time and place to work on your weaknesses, but using your strengths in your career or in the kind of job roles that you're going for has major advantages.
Yeah. And interesting, I did one of those, a test like that as well, James. And my expectation was that communication would be my number one skill. But actually, my number one skill was compassion and empathy. And I was like, really? It's funny what those things throw up. But it definitely has informed me going forward. And I mean, I guess one of the things I would think about in terms of uncovering strengths is simply writing it down. Like, just say, okay, what am I good at? And, challenge yourself. Go, I'm going to write down 20 things that I'm good at. And if that's, I'm good at dance and tango, or I'm good at gardening, then so be it. Write it down because you just don't know where that will be. You'll be able to bring this into your story. Now, Beck, you've written a book which talks about, forwarding your career and working in your career. Are there what would be your sort of 3 top tips for telling your story, both in resume interview, but also in networking, and how do we do that? And how do people, find the best ways to tell those stories, I guess is what I'm asking.
I want to apologise because there's a big leaf blower going on outside, and I apologise if you can hear, if that's all anyone can hear at the moment. But okay, so the first things that we touched on, and we've kind of touched on some of them again, but they're really important, so I'll list them. The number one is personalisation. Make sure that what you're saying is important to the other person. And coming back to your point around compassion being one of your strengths, that is one of the most important things of a storyteller, but we can all be that. We can be compassionate and empathetic. And by being empathetic, we put ourselves in our audience's shoes. So making sure that if you're at a networking event, for example, and you're thinking of going up to speak to somebody, if you've got a base understanding of them at all, what's great is just start thinking about what's valuable to them. What's something that's important to them? Is it their kids? Do they love beautiful food? And so is it some great restaurant tips? Is it personal development? So is there a great podcast you've listened to recently that you know they'd be interested in? So it's coming up with just some quick talking points that you can bring to them that's valuable to them. If you don't know what's valuable to them and you're feeling a bit nervous about the entire approach, one of my favourite sayings is, if you're feeling nervous, be of service. And the idea of that is hijacking your nerves and saying, I'm not here to bother this person. It's like, why would they want to talk to me? You're actually going, I'm going in to help this person. I'm going in to talk to this person to make them feel a bit better about their day, to perhaps bring them some advice or tips or something that I've got that's interesting to them. So as soon as you reframe it, and I use that all the time when I'm pitching stories to journalists, I am not a natural salesperson in any way, shape or form. I kind of hate it. It feels a bit gross to me to be bothering people or to be doing a bit of a hard sell. But I always reframe it and go, I've got this fantastic story for this journalist and all these people want to hear it. So I'm going to make sure that I put it in the best light and make sure that they can take it out to their audiences as well. So reframe it. If you're feeling nervous, be of service. So have that empathy. Personalization is the other one. And just a little hot tip at the moment is right now, because a lot of people are not seeing each other in person as much as we used to, right now our online presence is more important than ever. And that might be your social media accounts or it might be your website if you have a business. So it's time to do an audit of all of those things and make sure that everything that's online that's in your control, that's about you or your brand or your business, is in line with who you are and what you stand for today. Go through, if you have to go through, if your Facebook is public facing, or if you have Twitter or Instagram or your LinkedIn, go through and check that something that you posted 5 years ago is in line with who you are today. If it's not, perhaps delete it. Because again, prospective employers will be looking at these things. And something that you did say 10 years ago, like social media has been around for a long time now, something that you said 10 years ago may not be who you are right now. I know there's certainly things that I've posted 10 years ago that I think that'd probably just be embarrassing more than anything. But if it's not who you are and it's not what you want other people to see, just do an audit, do a cull, delete things. Because right now your online presence is speaking volumes about you. So take charge of that so that you're in charge of your own story and not somebody else.
And I think as well, I mean, it made me, thinking about that. I have a friend that I used to go to a lot of music festivals with, and he regularly will post photos from 12 or 14 years ago at music festivals. And I'm like, dude, no, just please don't do that. Because even though, my Facebook is personal, I do have clients, there are friends, life and work is so blended that, that's the way it is. And, I feel like I totally feel your pain, Beck. I hate sales. I hate selling. I find that's probably the thing I hate the most. But yeah, it is about, and I hate networking. And I'm a very extrovert, chatty, outgoing person, and I hate it. And I always feel nervous. And yeah, I guess I sort of think about, I'm like, yeah, I always think when I'm going to networking things, I'm like, find another person who's standing on their own or a group of people who look sort of friendly and ask them questions. People want to talk. I just ask loads of questions, and that's how. And then by asking lots of questions, you will find some, sort of connection.
It is. And just jumping to that point, I know earlier we were talking about, some people don't know what they're passionate about. But I bet you're still curious about something. And so sometimes it's just following that curiosity. You don't have to know the answers. but you can just have a few little questions. And you know, if you're at a networking event, it's quite easy because you'll be like, you're usually there for a purpose. So you can talk about how do you know what brought you to this event? Who are some of the people that you know here? How does this impact you and your career? What are you hoping to get out of it? There's a few little quick things that you can think of. But if you're, you know, at an industry event that's perhaps less like it's a bit more generalized, again, you can just think of, again, it's people, places, things. So you could say, who do you know here? That's related to people. Places, it could be, how did you get here today? What do you like this venue? Have you been to this place before? And things might be anything in the room. Do you like this drink? This drink is terrible. How bad's the wine? Like, it could be any of those things.
How good's the cheese? I think Yvonne Kelly's going to start cracking the whip soon in terms of timing. So, Nina, one of the things we're wondering about is whether a story is, how can you tell whether a story is true or false? And I work with someone who is a venture capitalist. So that means that she meets a lot of startups. Now, people in the startup community know that you have to have a story. In order to have a startup, you got to have a great story. And so she told me that she was in a pitching event, and she said you could tell instantly which of the stories were true and which of them were false. Nina, does the same ring true for, say, resumes, cover letters, interviews?
Yes, yes. So for people that interview all day, every day, you get very good at pulling out the ones that are exaggerated or false. And it's a really important point. I'm married to an engineer, and when I told him I was doing a session on storytelling, he is very, you know, the truth is the truth. He hears storytelling and he hears lies automatically because of the way his brain works, right? So it's storytelling is crucial, but it's also crucial that it's factual and it's authentic, and the story is about making it engaging, not about making it false. And good recruiters, good interviewers will use the follow-up questions. They'll do it nicely, so you may not even realize you're being tripped up. They're not there to try and make you feel bad, but they will uncover with the follow-up questions with comments like, so when you say we, just walk me through this. You say we achieved this. Can you just clarify, was that you or your manager? Were you in the project team? Did you run the project team? They start asking lots of clarifying questions. That there comes a point where you get unstuck if you've over-embellished what you're saying. Now, there is a fine line. You know, Beck talked about this is the opportunity to sell, just sell yourself. And for anyone out there that hates sales, and we just had a little chat about this, I encourage you to reframe that story, because going for an interview is selling yourself. There is nothing wrong with sales if you believe in your purpose and you're trying to help people. That's not sales, that's genuinely trying to help somebody else. And in this situation, you're genuinely trying to help someone else by being the best person for the role to help their organization achieve something that you want to do.
Just lie about it.
Right? But just don't lie about it is the point. And I think the way to do that then is to, when you do the rehearsal that we talked about earlier, is to look at what they're targeting, look at the selection criteria, and come up with a good example of each one of the key things they're looking for, and a story where you did play a genuinely key role in that example. So if they're looking for commercial acumen, think about a time you've displayed that. What did you specifically do? How did you influence it? What was the outcome and the achievement? And that's the story you practice telling. And because it's based in fact, it doesn't matter what they ask you. You can keep giving them the answers to the questions and you won't come unstuck.
I mean, I guess for me, one of the things that, you know, I work with a lot of women supporting sort of, emerging women leaders. And when I read their applications for awards, you know, it's probably similar in jobs. It's all talking about what we achieved. We achieved this and we achieved that. I'm like, hold on a second. You achieved it. Did you achieve it? If the answer is yes, then I achieved it. So I guess part of that is important as well, is taking control of those. Now, we just had a question come through as well, is do you use a different elevator pitch for different situations based on the type of company you're applying to? And the answer is absolutely yes. So the pitch model that I use is called the GADDY pitch. So that's GADDY. So the GADDY pitch starts with what you do. So in my case, I could say I am a communications consultant. Or I could say, ask a question about, you know, what's the biggest problem that my client has? They are struggling to communicate effectively or articulate what they do, right? So my opening to my pitch would be, you know how, so Nina says, Emma, what do you do? And I say, well, you know how a lot of businesses really struggle to articulate what they do and how they do it and what their story is. Yeah. Well, what I do is that I help them with that. And I help them craft that story so that they can achieve X, Y, and Z. If I was going into a pitch for, as a journalist, for a straight journalism role, that pitch would be very different. But check out the Gaddy pitch. Highly recommend it, because I think that it's, I think that it is really important. Anyone else on pitches? James, I'm going to ask you about pitching, because you probably have a good take on this.
I've never heard of the Gaddy pitch before, but it sounds very similar to how.
It's great. It's like, what's your customer's biggest problem and how you solve it? And that's like, it's really, really, really great. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's exactly what I would have said. I would have said, what is the problem that you help people solve, for what benefit? And then I would have that base message, depending on what I do, like what I actually care about doing. But I would change the language of the message from company to company, depending on how they are, what's their values, what's their culture. A little bit of that personalization that I think Beck was mentioning a little bit earlier. Relationships and conversations are a two-way street. So I don't want to talk at someone based on how I like to talk. I want to talk with them, including how they like to talk. So I want to tailor my language accordingly.
Yeah, that's great. And Beck, one of the other questions that has come up, and I'm asking you this because you're looking at resumes at the moment, and the question is, should I include hobbies? Now, I think, because I preach to everyone about how personal, you should be personal, it should be personality, that I think that there is space for, talking about, as a leader, I'm this type of person and I would love this job because X, Y, and Z, and a little bit about, who you are. I have a beautiful big dog who's currently asleep on the sofa, and, I love to dance tango. So Beck, what's your take on hobbies in resumes?
I think there's a place for it. Again, it depends on the role you're going for. If you're going for a really corporate job, yes, pop them in, but it needs to be balanced. So as long as you've answered their brief, you're providing a solution to their problem, and you've covered all of that, then yes, let them get to know you and just give a little bit, even if it could be, I really love, and when we're allowed to travel, the first thing I'm going to do is go snowboarding with my husband. Like, there's things that you can just add in at the very end, but just make sure that you're solving their problem first and answering their questions first, and then I think drop them in. I'm just thinking of all the ones that I'm looking at, and it's hard for me too. It's a hard job because they're coming to me for roles as being a professional communicator. So the level and the standard of what they're submitting to me needs to be very, very high. But the ones, and it's quite incredible. I'm seeing some really great communicators, but the ones that solve their problem, it could address everything in the point, and then I get to know a bit about them, and then that comes back to their values and it comes back to their why, because their hobbies are clearly in line with their values most of the time, which means I'm going to enjoy working with them. And again, when you're making a hire, you want somebody to be with you for a long period of time. So I want to make sure that I'm hiring somebody who's a real human being and has some work-life balance and has some hobbies outside of work, because I know then we're going to get along really well, and they'll be a great long-term fit.
Yeah.
So that was a long-winded way of saying, yes, let's put your hobbies in.
No, it was
in
great.
measure.
Really interesting to hear that. And I guess the same to Nina and also Yvonne. What do you guys think about hobbies?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think if depending on the role, I still think they should always be included. But if it's a very corporate role and you're maybe quite late in your career, it literally might be one line at the end of the resume. But what I think it does is it gives an ability for the person to connect with you on a personal level. So it actually comes back to the very beginning of this conversation where we were talking about how stories help create connections. Sometimes if the work is a little dry, or if there's not much storytelling in the work, it just gives someone an opener to say, oh, hey, Nina, you play hockey. I used to play hockey. How did you get, have you played all the way through? Or, and it just creates a bit of personal connection. So I would always include it in there.
Yeah, I agree. I think we in our coaching, we often suggest that obviously the professional overview, which is the first part of your resume, is such an important, and we covered this in our session yesterday, is to have the first paragraph, just as Beck said, that solves the problem. You know, what skills and what experience have you got in this area, in this field of specialization? And the second paragraph is about what are your passions and your strengths. And you can actually weave in some of your hobbies and interests that that kind of make it a bit relevant. So if you can say that the skills that you learn from doing martial arts is that, you know, you're really focused and diligent, and that relates to the type of job that you're applying for, you need those skills. You can actually you can weave that in. Similar if you work with charities, or and you, as Emma mentioned about being compassionate, whatever you're trying to get across, some of those things that you love to do on your weekend you can put that in that second paragraph of your professional overview. So we find that that works really well because it's quite subtle. It's not it's not kind of in your face, and then it also means that it can be a topic of conversation. And Beck, as you mentioned, it is nice to be able to make that connection. And Nina, you spoke about that real true connection with someone as well. The more connection, that even if you can just find one small connection with the interviewer, and there is a lot on LinkedIn. You can search and find out. You'll usually find one thing that you know that they're interested in, that you can start to open and make that connection very quickly.
Oh, I love that, Yvonne. So, would you recommend? I'm not going to call it stalking, but so when if I'm meeting somebody or interviewing them or having a meeting with them, I the first thing I do is LinkedIn them and read their LinkedIn profile, and try to find, like, where did they go to school, what university, do they know anyone that I know? And so is that something that you would recommend, is like find out about the person and see if you can somehow bring that connection?
Yeah, absolutely. And LinkedIn is so good at that because it does show you who your mutual connections are. And so you can reach out to some of those people and say, do you know this person well? And if they do, they'll be able to give you a little bit of insight into who they are. So also LinkedIn has it has a featured page now, like at the top of the profile. So if they've been featured in an article or a blog, or maybe on media, people really like to talk about themselves, as was mentioned earlier, and they like to feel good about themselves. So if you can start by saying, wow, I read that blog or that article that you wrote, and that really connected to me. I liked when you said this, this, and this. So any connection that you can make of something that they've done that's really good, or something that they've maybe, you can also on LinkedIn check their activity. So comments they've made on other people's posts, you can see what they are. So they might have commented on people saying, oh, well done on getting that new job. And you can connect and say, oh, I love how on LinkedIn you're so caring and supportive. And is that the type of management style that you have with your staff? So,
and I guess, Nina, same to you. I mean, and do you think it's important to check people out online first before you would go, say, to an interview situation?
Absolutely. And I think what's crucial here is that once you get to the interview situation, we've talked a lot about how we come ready with our own stories, but one of the best things you can do is actually get the interviewer to tell their story. And when you get, every interview will give you an opportunity where they say, have you got any questions for me? And one of your questions should always be, without fail, well, tell me about you. How did you come to work here? Why do you like working here, Emma? What is it you love about this organisation and the role here? Yeah. Because it gives them a chance to share their story with you, which is only going to help deepen that connection we've been talking about.
And I think the important thing to remember too, Nina, is that if you're looking for a job, like, you want to fit. So I think it's really important for you to find out about them and about their culture, because it's not enough that they want you. You need to want them too.
Absolutely. It's got to be as good a fit for you. So it's definitely a two-way interview process.
So just, I suppose, lastly, Nina, we've got 3 minutes left. Can you give me any of your sort of final top tips for good storytelling in resumes or cover letters or interviews?
So know what story you're telling and why. Make sure it's short and simple on the resume, and get ready to tell it in more depth, and make it animated when you talk about it so that the passion and the strength of it comes across.
And the thing is that when you're passionate about something, it comes across anyway, which is
exactly
when you feel excited. James, same question to you. Top tips for storytelling in a job scenario.
I loved what Nina said, especially about like knowing what you really care about and letting that passion come through. Delivering just straight information in a factual way might be very clear, but it's not very engaging. And as a potential employer, the potential employer wants to see your engagement, wants to see your care, wants to see your passion. So the more you can feel that whilst you're talking about your story and what it is, the ways in which you contribute, I think the bigger the impact it's going to have.
And I think the other part of this as well is, Nina, you mentioned that your husband is an engineer. One of the things that I had to incorporate into my workshops on storytelling, because I work with large corporates and I work with predominantly male, white CEOs of a certain age, I had to introduce the airy-fairy storytelling concept and put up a slide and say, people in this room, engineers, people who are focused on data, they roll their eyes, airy-fairy storytelling. It's not about throwing out the data, throwing out the facts. It's about hooking people's attention and engaging them with a good story that relates to what you're talking about. And then the facts, and then the data. You're certainly not throwing it out. So for anyone who's concerned about that, that's not it. And Beck, same question to you. Final top tips for job seekers.
I was just thinking about that then with what you were saying, and you're right, because I'm the same. We have a lot of big corporate clients who kind of wonder if telling a story is really a great idea. They think, oh, that's a bit wishy-washy. I'm not sure about that. Look at my job history. Shouldn't that speak for itself? Short answer, no, it doesn't speak for itself. Think of all of the great content that you might like to watch or listen to. What are the great shows that you watch on Netflix? What are the great podcasts that you might listen to? What are the great stories that you read in the paper? Every single one of them has a great story, and you can do that too. So tell it first step. The first step you've got to do is get through the interview, get to the interview stage. So make sure that you personalize and that you've crafted, you've put yourself in your interviewer's shoes and you're solving their problems, and then get to the next bit and be as passionate about it as possible. The other thing about passion is you want to be excited, because I'm going to hire somebody who's excited, because tell you what, there are some days in our job that are not exciting at all, and you still have to get out of bed every morning and go do the job. And you need to know that your employers are going to have that passion to carry them through the harder days, just as there are for the good days too.
And Beck, just because your book was on the topic of creative women, are the rules different if you're in a creative industry, or have you got any particular tips targeted to people in creative industries?
It's a good point. Yes, again, it's being a chameleon. So when you're in a creative industry, if your potential boss or your potential employer is a wildly creative, big picture, flamboyant person, yes, you can be a bit more flamboyant and exciting in your approach. But if you're peeling it back and going to be working in a much more corporate environment, you do need to rein it in a bit. So read the room. Just read the room is the very best thing. And to read the room, you have to do your research. So look online, find out about the company, find out what your employer's into you. To Nina's point, or Yvonne's point, I think it was about looking at what people on Facebook have been liking or commenting on, is a really good one. In turn, know that your prospective employer might be looking at you on LinkedIn and looking at what you've liked on and commented on as well, because that's how they'll be getting a picture of you too. So just be thoughtful and mindful about every interaction you're doing on social media, online, and then do your research as well.
Fantastic. And Yvonne, I'm going to come back to you as well with the same question. What would be your top tips for, as a recruiter looking at resumes, what would be your top tips for people in storytelling in resumes and cover letters and job seeking?
Yeah, so I think just as this conversation, and thank you all for being so amazing and sharing, and it's been really authentic and real. I think that's just it. Just be who you are and connect. And I've learned so much from this conversation. There's been so many gold tips. I've been busily writing, and I know Alison's been live tweeting all of them. So
I'm just going to interrupt you there, Yvonne. For you, what would have been some of the key learning from today?
So I think I loved, James, you talking about at the start, like how adversity reveals genius. So, and I think Emma, you echoed that. So, you know, even if you've been through a hard time, you can come out much better at the other end of that. So, make people also want to hear the bad stories as well as the good stories. And you know, I think find something that you care about and love, and know what you stand for. So I'm really aware that we're running out of time, and we want to get people off. So thank you so much, Beck, Emma, James, and Nina. And we'll gather all of this gold information. Beck, we've got a link to your book on the BridgingCareers.live website. James and Emma and Nina have their own page on there, so there's ways that you can connect through that. Thank you to all of you. Seemingly the chat on YouTube Live has been going crazy, so our Glow Up coaches and Alex have been super busy answering all those questions. So this afternoon we'll be back at 2 p.m. with Craig Foster and a beautiful panel talking about diversity and inclusion. Tomorrow morning, we'll continue this conversation and delve more into networking, which we touched on today. We'll follow that on Thursday with interviewing, and then we'll talk about career changing. And it's been so nice to see how all these conversations are flowing and connecting with each other. Subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can jump on there at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. and you'll see the live streams. All the recordings will be there for you. So yeah, thank you so much. We'll keep in touch, and we've got some podcasts and other events in the horizon. So we're really looking forward to continuing all of these conversations today. Thank you, everyone. I'm just about to share a QR code that will link you through to connect with us at Glow Up Careers. As I mentioned, we are a group of career coaches. So if you have further questions or want to engage, just get your camera on your phone. If you click on this QR code, you'll be able to interact and chat with us. So yeah, have a lovely day, everyone. Thank you. Thanks to all our panel members.